The woman everyone forgot would one day become the woman a duke could not forget. On a cold October evening in Yorkshire, when the last light of the sun faded behind the rolling hills and the windows of Ravenshire Estate glowed with candlelight, Miss Genevieve Hartwell stood alone beneath a staircase holding a silver tray she had no business carrying. The grand ballroom above her was alive with music, laughter, and the rustle of silk. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across polished floors. Footmen moved with practiced precision. Members of England's highest families filled the house of the Duke of Ravenshire for the annual autumn gathering that had become one of the most anticipated events of the season. Yet none of them knew that the woman ensuring every detail unfolded perfectly was standing in the shadows where no one looked. Genevieve adjusted the placement of a crystal decanter on the tray and glanced toward the ballroom doors. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The musicians had arrived on time. The floral arrangements had been placed correctly. The seating arrangements had avoided 3 family feuds and 1 brewing engagement scandal. The kitchen had successfully accommodated a viscountess who claimed she could not tolerate cream and an earl who insisted upon a particular brand of French wine. No one would ever know how much work it had taken to make the evening appear effortless. That was the nature of Genevieve's life. The better she performed her duties, the less visible she became. A young maid hurried toward her carrying a stack of folded linens. "Miss Hartwell, Mrs. Thompson says the dessert service is delayed by 10 minutes. Genevieve smiled gently. "Tell Mrs. Thompson not to worry. Ask the musicians to repeat the previous set before the supper call. No one will notice." The maid's expression brightened immediately. "Yes, miss." As the girl hurried away, Genevieve looked upward toward the sound of laughter drifting from the ballroom. Most guests assumed she was merely a companion to the Dowager Duchess of Ravenshire. Some believed she was a distant relation. Others scarcely noticed her existence at all. The truth was simpler. 6 years earlier, after her father's death left her nearly penniless, she had accepted the position of companion to the Dowager Duchess. She read correspondence, organized charitable events, accompanied the older woman on visits, and quietly solved problems before anyone realized they existed. It was respectable work. It was secure work. It was also work that ensured she remained perpetually on the edge of every room. Never fully included. Never entirely acknowledged. She had long ago learned how to smile through it. A burst of applause echoed from above. Genevieve stepped aside as 2 gentlemen descended the staircase discussing politics. Neither acknowledged her presence. They accepted the smooth functioning of the household the same way they accepted the existence of walls or carpets. Necessary. Unremarkable. Invisible. She lowered her eyes and continued toward the drawing room where several final preparations remained unfinished. The drawing room was empty except for the Dowager Duchess. Lady Eleanor Wycliffe sat in a high-backed chair near the fire, a shawl draped elegantly across her shoulders. Though well into her 60s, she retained the sharp gaze of a woman accustomed to commanding every room she entered. She looked up as Genevieve approached. The guests seemed pleased. Genevieve smiled. That is always the goal. The older woman studied her carefully. "You arranged all of this. Many people contributed. Do not evade the compliment." Genevieve laughed softly. "Then thank you, Your Grace." Lady Eleanor tilted her head. "You never take credit for anything. There is little point in seeking recognition for doing one's duty. And yet people should notice when duty is performed exceptionally well." Genevieve lowered her eyes. Compliments always made her uncomfortable. The Dowager Duchess had been attempting to draw her out for years. Unfortunately, Genevieve had become too practiced at remaining unnoticed. Before either woman could speak again, the sound of arriving voices drifted from the entrance hall. Lady Eleanor smiled faintly. "Ah, my son has arrived." Something stirred unexpectedly inside Genevieve's chest. It was a feeling she had spent years pretending did not exist. She folded her hands together and looked toward the doorway. A moment later, Sebastian Wycliffe entered the room. Duke of Ravenshire, 34 years old, one of the wealthiest men in England, one of the most respected, one of the most difficult to truly know. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried himself with effortless authority. His dark coat fit perfectly. His expression remained composed. The years had added a quiet confidence to his features that made him seem even more imposing than the young aristocrat Genevieve had first met 6 years earlier. He crossed the room and kissed his mother's cheek. "I trust the evening has not descended into chaos." "Only because Miss Hartwell prevented it," Lady Eleanor replied immediately. Sebastian glanced toward Genevieve. For one brief moment his gray eyes met hers. Then he nodded politely. "Miss Hartwell, Your Grace." The exchange lasted no more than 2 seconds. Yet somehow it left Genevieve feeling colder than before. Not because he had been rude. Sebastian Wickliffe was never rude. He was perfectly courteous, perfectly considerate, perfectly unaware. He had not asked about the event. He had not wondered who organized it. He had not recognized the countless hours she had devoted to making the evening successful. Why would he? In his world, everything simply worked. She was part of the machinery that kept it running. Necessary, reliable, forgettable. Lady Eleanor watched the interaction with narrowed eyes. Genevieve pretended not to notice. "If you will excuse me, Your Grace, I should ensure supper preparations remain on schedule." "Of course," Sebastian replied. She curtsied and departed before her composure could crack. The corridor outside felt blessedly quiet compared to the crowded rooms beyond. She paused beside a tall window overlooking the estate grounds. Moonlight stretched across the lawns. The distant hills faded into darkness. Somewhere far away an owl called through the night air. She rested her fingertips against the cool glass. 6 years. 6 years of telling herself she admired him only because he was kind. 6 years of convincing herself the feeling would fade. 6 years of watching him move through ballrooms surrounded by women far more beautiful, far wealthier, and far more suitable than a companion with a modest dowry and a forgotten surname. Perhaps that was why she remained invisible, because she had never truly allowed herself to hope. Footsteps approached. Genevieve quickly straightened. Lady Victoria Ashcombe appeared moments later, her crimson gown sweeping elegantly across the floor. Beautiful, wealthy, and perfectly positioned within society, Lady Victoria had spent the past year attracting considerable attention from every ambitious mother in England, including, many suspected, the attention of the Duke of Ravenshire himself. "Miss Hartwell." Lady Victoria's smile was flawless. "Lady Victoria, I understand you organized this evening. Only with considerable assistance." How modest! There was something sharp beneath the compliment. Genevieve recognized it immediately. Lady Victoria stepped closer. It must be satisfying to spend one's life helping. Later that evening, as the orchestra filled the ballroom with music and couples moved gracefully across the floor, Genevieve stood beside the Dowager Duchess near one of the marble columns. The event had become a triumph. Guests laughed, danced, socialized. Every detail functioned perfectly. Lady Eleanor glanced sideways. "You should be proud. The evening belongs to Ravenshire. The evening belongs to the person who created it." Genevieve smiled faintly. Before she could answer, her attention shifted toward the opposite side of the ballroom. Sebastian stood surrounded by guests. Lady Victoria beside him. Several mothers watched the pair with unmistakable interest. Whispers moved through the room. Predictions, speculation, future engagement announcements imagined before they existed. Genevieve looked away. She had become skilled at ignoring such things. Yet tonight something felt different. Lady Eleanor noticed the movement. The older woman's expression grew thoughtful. Very thoughtful. Across the ballroom Sebastian laughed at something one of the gentlemen said. The sound carried unexpectedly through the crowd. Genevieve felt it more than heard it. Strange how a single laugh could brighten an entire room. Stranger still how that same laugh could break a heart. The evening continued. The music played. The candles burned lower. Guests smiled and celebrated. Yet somewhere beneath the polished perfection of Ravenshire Estate, something had begun to shift. Genevieve could not have explained why. She only knew that for the first time in years, remaining invisible felt less like safety and more like sorrow. And as midnight approached, the Dowager Duchess continued watching her with growing concern. While far across the ballroom, the Duke of Ravenshire remained completely unaware that the woman holding his world together was quietly standing at the edge of it, wondering how much longer she could remain unseen. The orchestra had changed melodies 3 times since midnight, yet the ballroom remained as crowded as ever. Ravenshire Estate shimmered beneath hundreds of candles. Crystal reflected gold light across marble floors. Gentle laughter drifted through the air. Conversations overlapped in polished waves of aristocratic charm. It was precisely the sort of evening guests would remember fondly for years. Genevieve Hartwell stood beside a refreshment table near the far wall and watched a footman discreetly replace an empty champagne tray before anyone noticed. Another small crisis solved. Another invisible task completed. Across the room, young ladies competed for attention. Mothers measured prospects. Gentlemen negotiated marriages as carefully as business agreements. Nothing unusual. Nothing surprising. England's upper circles followed familiar patterns. Genevieve knew every one of them. She had spent 6 years observing from the edges of rooms exactly like this. A dowager countess approached the refreshment table and smiled warmly. "Miss Hartwell, I must compliment the arrangements. Everything has been delightful." Genevieve inclined her head. "You are very kind, Lady Blackstone." "Not kind. Honest." The older woman lowered her voice. "Although I suspect no one will properly thank you." Genevieve smiled. "That has never been necessary." Lady Blackstone studied her for a moment before moving away. The comment lingered longer than it should have. "No one will properly thank you." Perhaps because gratitude had never truly been what Genevieve wanted. Respect would have been enough. To be seen would have been enough. A servant approached carrying a message. "The Dowager Duchess requests your presence in the blue salon, miss." Genevieve immediately excused herself. The blue salon was quieter than the ballroom. Several guests occupied the room, enjoying conversation away from the noise of dancing. Lady Eleanor sat comfortably near the fireplace surrounded by a small gathering of acquaintances. Sebastian stood nearby speaking with Lord Ashcombe, father of Lady Victoria. The sight was enough to confirm every rumor circulating through Yorkshire society. Genevieve felt a familiar ache before she firmly pushed it aside. Lady Eleanor gestured for her to join them. "Miss Hartwell, there you are." Genevieve curtsied. "Your Grace. We were discussing impossible marriages." The Dowager Duchess smiled mischievously. "A favorite pastime among the aristocracy." Several guests laughed. Lord Ashcombe lifted his glass. "A dangerous topic. An entertaining one," Lady Eleanor replied. "Every season produces at least a dozen imaginary engagements." Another gentleman chuckled. "Usually invented by mothers with unmarried daughters." More laughter followed. Genevieve stood quietly behind the Dowager Duchess's chair. She had no expectation of participating. The conversation belonged to people of higher rank. That was normal. Then Lady Beatrice Farnham, a widow with a reputation for saying exactly what she thought, glanced toward Sebastian. "Speaking of imaginary engagements, Your Grace, half of Yorkshire believes you shall propose before Christmas." Sebastian looked amused. "Half of Yorkshire needs more interesting hobbies." The room erupted with polite laughter. Lady Beatrice smiled. "And whom shall you disappoint this season?" "The list is apparently extensive." "Perhaps Lady Victoria?" another guest suggested. Lady Victoria herself sat elegantly near the fireplace and lowered her eyes with practiced modesty. Sebastian offered no answer. His silence only fueled the amusement around him. Then Lady Beatrice's gaze wandered unexpectedly toward Genevieve. Something sparkled in her eyes. The look of someone about to create mischief. Genevieve felt immediate unease. "Although," Lady Beatrice said thoughtfully, "perhaps we have all been looking in the wrong direction." Several guests followed her gaze. Genevieve suddenly wished herself anywhere else. "Lady Beatrice," Lord Ashcombe warned lightly, "do not begin trouble." "I never begin trouble. I merely notice it." Her smile widened. "For example, I have often wondered whether Miss Hartwell is secretly devoted to our Duke." The room laughed. Not cruelly. Not viciously. Simply with the casual amusement of people seeking entertainment. Yet Genevieve felt every eye shift toward her. Heat flooded her face. For a second nobody spoke. Then Lady Beatrice continued. "Surely I cannot be the only one who has considered it. She manages his household. Solves his problems. protects his reputation, organizes his life. More smiles appeared, more amused expressions. Someone murmured agreement. Another guest laughed quietly. Genevieve remained perfectly still. She had learned long ago that composure was often the last defense available to a woman. "Lady Beatrice," Lady Eleanor said sharply, "you are being unfair." "I mean no harm," the widow replied. "I merely admire loyalty." The attention shifted toward Sebastian. The room waited. Genevieve did not realize she had stopped breathing until that moment. Sebastian's reaction would end the conversation. A simple dismissal. A change of subject. Nothing more. Instead, he smiled. It was not a cruel smile. It was not intended to wound. That made what followed somehow worse. "Miss Hartwell?" he said. "I should hope not." A few guests laughed. He continued before anyone could speak. "She deserves a poet, not a duke." The room erupted with laughter. Warm laughter. Comfortable laughter. Harmless laughter. The sort people shared when everyone understood a joke. Genevieve heard every sound. Every chuckle. Every amused sigh. Every polite attempt to hide amusement behind a fan. Sebastian himself laughed softly. Not at her. Not intentionally. Simply at the absurdity of the suggestion. Yet none of that mattered. Because in a single moment he had revealed exactly how impossible the idea seemed to him. Not unlikely. Not inconvenient. Impossible. Genevieve smiled. Years of practice allowed her to do it automatically. Her expression remained calm. Her posture remained elegant. No one looking directly at her would have noticed the damage. But inside something cracked. Lady Eleanor's face hardened immediately. She glanced toward Genevieve with visible concern. Sebastian seemed entirely unaware. The conversation moved on. Another topic emerged. Someone mentioned Parliament. Another guest discussed the London season. Laughter returned to normal. The moment passed for everyone except Genevieve. She quietly excused herself before anyone noticed. "If you will pardon me." No one objected. No one stopped her. She walked calmly from the room. Down the corridor. Through a side hallway. Past portraits of long-dead ancestors who stared from gilded frames. Her pace never quickened. She would not allow herself that weakness. Not here. Not where someone might see. Outside, the night air struck her face like cold water. The terrace overlooked the moonlit gardens. Gravel paths stretched through neatly trimmed hedges. Fountains shimmered beneath silver light. Genevieve gripped the stone balustrade and stared into the darkness. For several moments she could not think. Could not feel. Could only hear the echo of laughter. She deserves a poet, not a duke. A harmless remark. Polite remark. Yet beneath it rested a truth she had spent years refusing to confront. He had never seen her. Not truly. She had imagined small moments. Shared conversations. Quiet kindnesses. The occasional glance. Foolish things. Meaningless things. She had constructed entire dreams from scraps of attention because hope was easier than reality. Tears gathered unexpectedly. She blinked them away at once. No, she would not cry because a man failed to love her. She would not cry because a dream had finally died. The dream should have died years ago. Footsteps sounded behind her. Lady Eleanor emerged from the house carrying a shawl. "You should not stand in the cold." Genevieve accepted the shawl automatically. "Thank you, Your Grace." Silence settled between them. The older woman studied her carefully. "He is an idiot." Genevieve laughed despite herself. "That is not a statement many people would dare make. Fortunately, I am his mother." Genevieve looked toward the gardens. "He meant no harm." "That does not erase harm." Her voice softened. "Genevieve." Hearing her name spoken with such tenderness nearly shattered the fragile control she had maintained. "Please do not." Genevieve whispered. Lady Eleanor's eyes filled with sadness. For a moment neither woman spoke. Finally Genevieve straightened her shoulders. "The evening is nearly finished. I should ensure the guests are comfortable. You are not required to carry everyone else's burdens. Someone must." The older woman reached for her hand. "And who carries yours?" Genevieve had no answer, because there was none. An hour later the final guests began departing. Carriages rolled away beneath the stars. Footmen closed doors. Servants extinguished candles room by room. Ravenshire estate slowly settled into silence. Genevieve remained awake long after everyone else retired. She sat alone in her modest room overlooking the eastern gardens. A single candle flickered beside her desk. The house felt different tonight, not because anything had changed, because something finally had. For years she had built a life around a place that did not truly belong to her, around people she cared for deeply, around a man who would never see her as anything more than part of the background of his existence. The realization hurt less than it should have. Perhaps because some part of her had always known. Her gaze settled on a sheet of blank paper. Then another. Then a third. The candle flame danced gently. Outside, darkness stretched across Yorkshire. Slowly, very slowly, Genevieve reached for a pen. Her fingers trembled only once. By the time the first words appeared on the page, her hand had become completely steady. Somewhere else in the vast estate, Sebastian Wycliffe slept peacefully, unaware that a few careless words had changed the course of 2 lives. And as the candle burned lower beside her desk, Genevieve began writing the letter that would end 6 years of silence. The first line took nearly 10 minutes to write. Genevieve stared at the paper while the candle beside her desk burned steadily lower. The estate had fallen silent hours ago. Servants slept. Guests had departed. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb the darkness surrounding Ravenshire. Yet her mind refused to rest. For 6 years she had built a life within these walls. 6 years of quiet routines. 6 years of solving problems before they appeared. 6 years of belonging everywhere and nowhere at once. Now she found herself facing a question she had spent years avoiding. Who was she when she was no longer needed by Ravenshire? Her pen hovered above the page. Finally she began. Your Grace. She stopped immediately. No, that would never do. This letter was not meant for Sebastian. She folded the page and set it aside. A second sheet replaced it. This time she addressed it properly. Your Grace. It is with gratitude for your kindness and confidence that I submit my resignation from my position as companion and secretary within the Ravenshire household. The words appeared neat and controlled. No trace of emotion. No sign of heartbreak. No evidence that the woman writing them had spent years loving a man who never noticed. By the time she finished the letter, dawn remained several hours away. Genevieve sanded the ink carefully and folded the page. Then she sat motionless, staring at it. Strange. After all the turmoil of the evening, she felt remarkably calm. Perhaps because the decision itself had already been made. The letter merely acknowledged it. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. The door opened cautiously. Sarah, one of the younger maids, stepped inside carrying a folded blanket. I noticed your light was still on, miss. Genevieve smiled. You should be asleep. So should you. Sarah hesitated. Is everything all right? The concern in the girl's voice touched her unexpectedly. Everything will be. Sarah glanced toward the folded letter on the desk but politely asked no questions. Well, if you need anything, I'm awake for another hour. Thank you. After the maid departed, Genevieve looked around the room. It was modest by aristocratic standards. A narrow bed, a small fireplace, a writing desk, shelves lined with books accumulated over years. Every object held memories. Yet for the first time she realized none of them truly belonged to her future. The realization felt liberating. By sunrise she had made another decision. She would not merely resign. She would leave. Not next month. Not after endless discussions and attempts to persuade her otherwise. Immediately, the thought should have frightened her. Instead it filled her with a sense of peace she had not experienced in years. The following morning dawned gray and cold. Yorkshire mist drifted across the estate grounds. Ravenshire slowly awakened around her. Footsteps echoed through corridors. Kitchen fires were lit. Servants began preparing breakfast. Genevieve carried herself through her duties exactly as she always had. No one noticed anything unusual. By mid-morning she requested a private meeting with the Dowager Duchess. Lady Eleanor received her in the library. The older woman looked up from her correspondence and immediately sensed something was wrong. Close the door, Genevieve. Genevieve obeyed. Lady Eleanor studied her face carefully. You have made a decision. It was not a question. Genevieve nodded. I have. Silence filled the room. The Dowager Duchess already knew the answer before hearing it. You are leaving. Genevieve lowered her eyes. Yes, Your Grace. Lady Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Not from surprise. From sadness. When? As soon as possible. And nothing I say will change your mind? Genevieve's voice softened. You have given me more kindness than I can ever repay. But I cannot remain. The older woman's gaze moved toward the window. Because of Sebastian? Genevieve felt her throat tighten. Not entirely. That means yes. Neither woman spoke for several moments. Finally, Lady Eleanor rose and crossed the room. You should have left years ago. Genevieve blinked in surprise. Your Grace. Not because you were unwelcome. Because you deserved a life beyond serving everyone else's needs. Her voice trembled slightly. I have watched you sacrifice your own happiness for 6 years. Genevieve struggled to respond. I chose this position willingly. You chose survival. The older woman reached for her hand. There is a difference. Tears threatened again. Genevieve fought them back. Lady Eleanor squeezed her fingers gently. Where will you go? Bath. The answer came immediately. She had considered it all night. An old school friend lives there. She has offered assistance before. Then you already planned everything. Genevieve smiled faintly. I believe I did. The Dowager Duchess laughed softly despite her sadness. You always were efficient. A long silence followed. Then Lady Eleanor crossed to her writing desk and opened a drawer. She removed a sealed envelope. Take this. Genevieve stared at it. Your Grace, I cannot. You can. The older woman's expression became firm. Do not argue. Genevieve reluctantly accepted it. What is it? Something that belongs to your future. Her eyes softened. Not your past. Genevieve understood immediately that it was money. More money than she would ever willingly accept. She also understood refusing would only hurt the woman she cared for deeply. Thank you. Lady Eleanor embraced her. The gesture shattered the last of Genevieve's defenses. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. When they finally separated, both understood what remained unsaid. Farewells had already begun. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Genevieve organized records, completed unfinished correspondence, prepared instructions for tasks that would eventually require another person to assume her responsibilities. No one questioned her diligence. It appeared entirely normal. Shortly before dinner, she encountered Sebastian in the West Corridor. He carried several documents beneath one arm and looked mildly distracted. Miss Hartwell, Your Grace. He paused. I have not yet thanked you for the success of the gathering. The words surprised her. Perhaps under different circumstances they might have meant something. Now they felt strangely distant. You are very kind. Several guests specifically praised the event. I am pleased everyone enjoyed themselves. Sebastian studied her briefly. Are you unwell? She nearly laughed. 6 years. 6 years of unnoticed affection. Yet somehow he sensed a change now. I am perfectly well. Good. He nodded. Mother would be lost without you. The comment was intended as praise. Instead it confirmed everything. Mother would be lost without you. Not I. Not Ravenshire. Not this household. Only a useful role. A valuable employee. Nothing more. I am glad I have been helpful, she replied. Sebastian smiled politely before continuing down the corridor. Genevieve watched him disappear around the corner. Then she returned to her work. That evening she packed. Not much. A few dresses. Books she treasured. Personal letters. Her father's pocket watch. The possessions of an entire life fit into 2 modest trunks. It was astonishing how little one truly owned when stripped of illusion. Near midnight another knock sounded at her door. Lady Eleanor entered carrying a small wooden box. This belonged to my grandmother. Genevieve frowned. Your Grace. Take it. Inside rested an elegant silver compass. Worn with age but beautifully preserved. Why? The older woman's smile carried unmistakable affection. Because every traveler deserves a way forward. Genevieve could not trust herself to speak. Hours later, after the estate had fallen asleep, she completed one final task. Her resignation letter rested atop her desk. Beside it lay a shorter note addressed to Lady Eleanor. Personal farewell. Nothing dramatic. Nothing emotional. Simply gratitude. Outside her window, the eastern horizon remained dark. The estate slept peacefully. No one yet realized that by tomorrow one familiar presence would be gone. Genevieve extinguished the candle and sat quietly in darkness. Somewhere beyond Ravenshire's walls, an entirely different life waited. Uncertain, frightening, free. For the first time in many years, she found herself looking toward the future rather than backward toward a dream that had never truly existed. And as the final hours of night slipped away, she made a silent promise to herself. When she left Ravenshire, she would not look back. The estate clock struck 4 in the morning as Genevieve Hartwell opened her eyes for the final time in the room she had occupied for 6 years. For a few moments she remained still beneath the blankets, listening to the silence. Ravenshire slept. The corridors were empty. The fireplaces had burned low. Beyond the windows, darkness still covered the Yorkshire countryside. A faint silver line rested along the eastern horizon where dawn waited patiently beyond the hills. This was the hour when servants had not yet begun their duties and aristocrats still dreamed beneath warm quilts. The perfect time to disappear. She rose quietly and dressed in a simple traveling gown of dark blue wool. Nothing elegant. Nothing remarkable. The sort of attire designed to attract no attention. Her trunks had already been sent ahead to the village coaching station the previous evening under the pretense of storage. Only a small traveling bag remained. She tied the strings carefully and glanced around the room one final time. The narrow bed, the bookshelf, the writing desk, the chair beside the fireplace where she had spent countless evenings balancing household accounts and organizing correspondence. Every corner held memories. Some were happy, others painful. Most were simply ordinary. Together they represented 6 years of her life. She should have felt sadness. Instead she felt gratitude. This room had sheltered her when she possessed nothing. It had given her stability. It had given her purpose. Now it was time to leave it behind. Genevieve crossed to the desk and placed her hand briefly upon the polished wood. Then she turned away. No looking back. She had promised herself that much. The corridor beyond remained dark except for a single lamp burning near the staircase. Her footsteps echoed softly against the floorboards. The familiar sounds and scents of Ravenshire surrounded her. Beeswax polish, old books, faint traces of wood smoke lingering from yesterday's fires. She had known this house almost as intimately as its owners, perhaps more intimately than some of them knew it themselves. That thought almost made her smile. At the bottom of the staircase she paused. A figure emerged from the shadows near the entrance hall. Lady Eleanor. The Dowager Duchess wore a dark traveling cloak over her nightdress and leaned lightly upon a cane. She looked as though she had not slept at all. Genevieve's heart tightened. Your Grace. The older woman smiled sadly. Did you truly think I would allow you to leave without saying goodbye? Genevieve lowered her eyes. I hoped you would be sleeping. I have never been particularly obedient. That earned a faint laugh. For several moments neither woman spoke. The silence between them held years of affection, years of shared routines, years of understanding that needed no explanation. Finally Lady Eleanor stepped forward. Are you frightened? Genevieve considered the question honestly. A little. Good. The answer surprised her. The Dowager Duchess smiled gently. People should be frightened when they begin a new life. It means they understand its importance. Emotion tightened Genevieve's throat. You always know the right thing to say. Nonsense. I simply had more time to make mistakes. The older woman reached into her cloak pocket and produced a folded envelope. One last thing. Genevieve accepted it reluctantly. You have already given me too much. Open it after you arrive in Bath. Her expression softened. Promise me. I promise. Lady Eleanor nodded. Then she did something entirely unexpected. She cupped Genevieve's face between both hands. Do not spend your life making yourself smaller for the comfort of others. Tears immediately threatened. Your Grace, listen to me. Her voice remained gentle but firm. You are intelligent, capable, kind. Any household would be fortunate to have you. Any family would be fortunate to know you. She paused. And any man would be fortunate to earn your love. Genevieve could not speak. She simply embraced the older woman tightly. For a moment neither moved. Neither wanted to. Eventually Lady Eleanor stepped back. Her eyes glistened but her posture remained strong. Go before I become sentimental. Genevieve smiled through tears. I think that happened hours ago. Possibly. They shared one final look. Then Genevieve turned toward the entrance. The great front doors opened quietly. Cold morning air swept inside. The world beyond Ravenshire waited in darkness and mist. A carriage stood ready near the front steps. The driver climbed down and touched his hat respectfully. Miss Hartwell. Good morning. She moved toward the carriage. Then stopped. Something made her glance upward toward the second-floor windows. Most remained dark. One did not. A single light glowed faintly behind a curtain in the east wing. Sebastian's study. Genevieve stared at it for only a second. Perhaps he was awake working late. Perhaps he had never gone to bed. Perhaps it meant nothing at all. It no longer mattered. She climbed into the carriage. Moments later the wheels began rolling across the gravel drive. Ravenshire slowly receded behind her. The estate appeared almost dreamlike in the pre-dawn darkness. Towers rising through mist. Windows glowing softly. Gardens hidden beneath shadows. For years it had been the center of her world. Now it became part of her past. She did not look back again. The carriage passed through the estate gates just as the first hints of sunrise touched the horizon. Yorkshire unfolded before her in muted shades of gray and silver. Fields stretched toward distant hills. Stone cottages rested quietly among patches of woodland. Morning fog drifted across meadows like pale ribbons. The beauty of it took her breath away. Strange. She had lived here for years and rarely noticed the landscape beyond estate business. Now everything seemed sharper, more vivid, more alive. Freedom looked remarkably beautiful. Several miles away, Ravenshire Estate slowly awakened. Servants began their duties. Fires were lit. Breakfast preparations started. The household moved through familiar routines. Yet one small absence had already begun altering the rhythm of the morning. Sarah, the young maid, knocked gently on Genevieve's door. No answer. Assuming her employer had risen early, she entered. The room was empty, perfectly neat, perfectly orderly. The bed had been made, the fireplace cleaned, the shelves dusted. Only one thing appeared unusual. A folded letter rested atop the writing desk. Sarah stared at it for several seconds before hurrying from the room. 20 minutes later, Lady Eleanor sat in the library holding both letters. One formal, one personal. She had already known this moment would come. Yet seeing the empty room still hurt more than expected. Her gaze shifted toward the formal resignation. Then toward the heartfelt farewell addressed specifically to her. She pressed her lips together. Across the estate, Sebastian entered the breakfast room carrying a newspaper beneath one arm. He appeared entirely unaware that anything significant had occurred. Good morning, Mother. Lady Eleanor looked up from her correspondence. Good morning. Sebastian poured coffee. You seem unusually serious. Do I? Yes. He sat opposite her. Has something happened? The Dowager Duchess studied her son carefully. There was no malice in him. No cruelty. Only blindness. The sort of blindness privilege often created. She wondered how long it would take him to notice. Perhaps days. Perhaps weeks. Perhaps longer. Genevieve has left Ravenshire. Sebastian paused. Left. This morning. He frowned slightly. For how long? Permanently. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds. Yet something shifted inside the room. Small. Almost imperceptible. Sebastian set down his coffee cup. I was not aware she intended to resign. Clearly, Lady Eleanor's answer carried more meaning than the words themselves. Sebastian looked genuinely surprised. Did something happen? Lady Eleanor thought of the ballroom. The laughter. The careless remark. The expression on Genevieve's face afterward. Yes, she said quietly. Something happened, but she did not explain further. Not yet, because some lessons could not be taught. They had to be discovered. And far beyond the estate, as dawn finally broke across the Yorkshire countryside, Genevieve Hartwell watched sunlight spill across the rolling hills and realized she was smiling. For the first time in years, there was no schedule waiting for her. No responsibilities demanding her attention. No impossible hope quietly breaking her heart. Only a road stretching toward an uncertain future. And despite everything she was leaving behind, she had never felt lighter. 3 days after Genevieve Hartwell left Ravenshire Estate, Sebastian Wycliffe found himself standing in the middle of the library, unable to locate a document that should have been directly in front of him. The realization irritated him far more than it should have. He opened one drawer, then another, then a third. Nothing. The requested correspondence from a tenant dispute in North Yorkshire had vanished. "Where is it?" he muttered. The question was directed at no one. Unfortunately, no one seemed capable of answering it. A nervous footman shifted beside the doorway. "I believe Miss Hartwell usually organized those files, Your Grace." Sebastian stared at the empty drawer. "Yes, I am aware." The footman wisely retreated. Sebastian eventually found the document exactly where it belonged. Genevieve had labeled it clearly, filed it properly, indexed it within a separate ledger. The problem had not been the filing system. The problem had been his unfamiliarity with it. He closed the drawer and continued his morning. By itself, the incident meant nothing. Yet similar moments kept occurring throughout the day. The cook requested clarification regarding next week's charitable luncheon. The gardener needed approval for a donation promised to a local church. 2 letters required responses concerning a scholarship fund. Every inquiry ended the same way. Miss Hartwell handled that. Miss Hartwell would know. Miss Hartwell arranged it. By evening, Sebastian found the repetition mildly irritating. Not because he missed Genevieve. That would have been absurd. She had merely resigned. People resigned from positions every day. No doubt she would soon discover Bath less charming than anticipated and accept another appointment elsewhere. Life continued. Ravenshire continued. Everything continued. Or so he assumed. The following morning disproved the theory. At breakfast, Lady Eleanor calmly set down her teacup and observed her son with open amusement. "You appear tired." Sebastian glanced up from a stack of household reports. "I am managing several issues." "Issues that did not exist last week?" He ignored the question. His mother smiled into her tea. "Interesting." Sebastian chose not to respond. Across the room, a maid accidentally delivered the wrong correspondence. A second servant interrupted to ask about arrangements for an upcoming charity event. Then the housekeeper requested clarification regarding a guest list. By the time breakfast ended, Sebastian felt strangely exhausted. "How many responsibilities did Miss Hartwell actually manage?" he asked. Lady Eleanor nearly laughed. "You truly do not know." "Apparently not. That should concern you." He frowned. "Why?" "Because she carried half this household upon her shoulders and no one noticed." Sebastian said nothing. The comment lingered unpleasantly in his thoughts long after breakfast concluded. Several days passed. Then a week. Ravenshire continued functioning, but not smoothly. Small mistakes multiplied. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing dramatic. Yet problems emerged with frustrating regularity. A dinner invitation received no response because the letter had been misplaced. A shipment of books intended for the village school arrived at the wrong address. A local widow expecting assistance from one of the estate charities received delayed funds because paperwork had not been completed correctly. Each issue required attention. Each issue consumed time. Each issue somehow led back to Genevieve. Sebastian began noticing her absence everywhere. Not emotionally, practically, rationally, objectively. At least that was what he told himself. One rainy afternoon, he entered the study and discovered a stack of neatly labeled ledgers arranged upon his desk. A note rested atop them, in his mother's unmistakable handwriting. "Since you insist upon solving everything yourself, you may wish to review these." Sebastian frowned and opened the first ledger. Detailed records filled every page. Tenant concerns. charitable distributions, household expenditures, staff schedules, educational grants, medical assistance funds, estate correspondence, hundreds of entries, thousands of details, all maintained with remarkable precision. Page after page revealed the same thing. Genevieve had quietly managed an astonishing portion of Ravenshire's daily operations. Not because anyone ordered her to, because she cared enough to ensure every responsibility was handled properly. Sebastian sat back slowly. For the first time, genuine surprise replaced irritation. Good Lord! Later that evening, he carried one of the ledgers into the drawing room where Lady Eleanor sat reading beside the fire. Did she truly oversee all of this? His mother looked up. Only the portions no one else bothered to notice. He lowered himself into a nearby chair. Why? Lady Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Because the work needed doing. Most people would have delegated half of it. Genevieve was not most people. Silence followed. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Firelight flickered across the room. Finally Sebastian spoke again. She never complained. No. She never requested recognition. No. She never asked for anything. Lady Eleanor closed her book. That may have been part of the problem. Sebastian frowned. I do not understand. The older woman studied him carefully. I know. Then she returned her attention to the fire. The conversation ended. Yet once again her words lingered. I know. Days became 2 weeks. Then 3. Autumn deepened across Yorkshire. The trees surrounding Ravensshire glowed with shades of gold and crimson. Mornings arrived colder. Evenings arrived earlier. Life moved forward. Still, Genevieve did not return. Sebastian had expected a letter by now. A request for a reference. News from Bath. Something. Nothing arrived. Oddly, he found himself checking the morning correspondence more often than before. Not intentionally. Merely out of habit. One afternoon he entered the library and noticed Sarah dusting shelves. The young maid paused upon seeing him. Your Grace. Sebastian nodded. Then something caught his attention. A small vase of dried lavender rested near the window. That arrangement is new. Sarah smiled faintly. Miss Hartwell always placed fresh flowers there. Sebastian glanced toward the vase. Did she? Every Monday morning. The maid hesitated. She said libraries should never feel forgotten. Forgotten. The word settled strangely in the quiet room. After Sarah departed, Sebastian remained standing near the window longer than necessary. Fresh flowers. Every Monday. For 6 years. He had never noticed. The realization bothered him more than it should have. That evening, while preparing correspondence, he reached automatically toward a particular shelf. His hand froze halfway there. Genevieve had always kept extra stationery in that location. The shelf stood empty now. An absurd disappointment passed through him. He almost laughed at himself. What nonsense. The woman had simply accepted another path in life. Why should her absence feel so persistent? Yet the question refused to disappear. The next morning brought another unexpected discovery. Sebastian was reviewing estate accounts when he opened a drawer he rarely used. Inside rested a collection of handwritten notes, brief reminders, organizational instructions, future scheduling recommendations, all written in Genevieve's precise script. He examined one page, then another, then another. Every note anticipated a potential problem before it occurred. Every solution was practical, efficient, thoughtful. His gaze lingered on a particular line. If Mrs. Whitmore's roof repairs exceed the allocated amount, transfer funds from the autumn entertainment budget. Shelter should always take priority over spectacle. Sebastian stared at the sentence. Not because of the financial recommendation, because of the person behind it. Shelter should always take priority over spectacle. Such a simple observation. Yet it revealed something essential. Genevieve had never viewed responsibilities as obligations. She viewed them as people, real needs, real lives. For reasons he could not fully explain, the realization unsettled him. That night he walked alone through the estate corridors. Ravensshire remained beautiful, efficient, prosperous, yet something subtle felt different. The atmosphere itself seemed altered, as though a familiar note had vanished from a favorite piece of music. Difficult to identify, impossible to ignore once noticed. Passing the library, he paused. The vase of lavender remained beside the window. Moonlight spilled across the shelves. Silence filled the room. Sebastian found himself remembering Genevieve standing near that same window with a stack of correspondence balanced in her arms. Calm, competent, quietly amused by something he had said. The memory arrived unexpectedly. More surprising still was how vivid it felt. He could not recall Lady Victoria's last conversation with the same clarity. The thought made him frown. Strange, very strange. Somewhere in Bath, hundreds of miles away, Genevieve Hartwell was beginning a new life. Sebastian knew almost nothing about it. Yet standing alone in the moonlit library, he realized something for the first time. Ravenshire had lost far more than an employee. And the most troubling part was that he still could not explain exactly why. A month after Genevieve left Ravenshire, the first snow arrived. Came early that year. Thin white frost covered the estate gardens before dawn and transformed the Yorkshire countryside into a landscape of silver and pale blue. Sebastian stood at the window of his study, watching the grounds disappear beneath winter's advance. Normally he enjoyed the first snowfall. It brought a sense of order, a sense of stillness. This year it brought something else. Restlessness. He turned away from the window and returned to the correspondence spread across his desk. At least he attempted to. 5 minutes later he realized he had read the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing a single word. Frustrated, he tossed the letter aside. Something was wrong. Not with the estate. Not with the accounts. Not with the tenants or the harvest reports. Something was wrong with him. The realization irritated him immensely. Across the room, the grandfather clock ticked steadily. Fire crackled in the hearth. Everything remained exactly as it should. Yet nothing felt quite right. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. His secretary stepped inside carrying a stack of papers. The young man had been hired 2 weeks earlier to help manage the workload Genevieve once handled almost effortlessly. Unfortunately, he lacked both her experience and her intuition. Your Grace, there is a problem regarding the Winter Relief Fund. Sebastian closed his eyes briefly. Another problem. What sort of problem? Several families received duplicate distributions while others received none. Sebastian stared at him. How? We are still investigating. Of course they were. Genevieve would have solved the issue before it occurred. The thought arrived automatically now. It happened dozens of times each day. The secretary shifted uncomfortably. Miss Hartwell maintained a more complex system than we initially realized. Sebastian almost laughed. More complex. That was becoming a recurring phrase. Everything Genevieve touched apparently contained layers nobody noticed until after she departed. Correct it. Yes, Your Grace. After the secretary left, Sebastian remained seated in silence. The estate had survived for generations before Genevieve arrived. It would survive after her departure as well. Rationally, he understood that. Emotionally, he found himself less convinced. Later that afternoon, he attended a charity committee meeting hosted at Ravenshire. Several local families gathered in the drawing room to discuss winter assistance programs. The event had always been one of Genevieve's responsibilities. She coordinated donations, organized volunteers, managed correspondence, ensured every family received what they needed. This year, the meeting felt strangely disorganized. Discussions drifted. Documents were misplaced. Minor disagreements consumed unnecessary time. Eventually, Lady Eleanor observed the growing frustration around the room and intervened. Within minutes, order returned. The older woman remained as formidable as ever. Yet even she appeared tired afterward. Once the guests departed, Sebastian accompanied her toward the library. You handled that rather well. Lady Eleanor smiled faintly. Experience. It seemed more difficult than usual, because Genevieve normally managed half the work before anyone entered the room. Sebastian sighed. Again. Again what? Everything leads back to her. The Dowager Duchess stopped walking. Perhaps there is a reason. He frowned. Mother. No. Listen to yourself. Her expression softened. You speak of her every day. Sebastian opened his mouth to protest, then stopped, because she was right. The realization unsettled him. Only because her absence continues creating complications. Lady Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. If that explanation comforts you, I suppose we may pretend it is true. Before he could respond, she continued down the corridor. Sebastian watched her go. Somehow his mother's observations had become increasingly uncomfortable lately. The worst part was that he could not entirely dismiss them. Several days later, an invitation arrived from Lord Ashcombe. A small gathering. Dinner followed by cards and music. Under ordinary circumstances, Sebastian might have declined. Instead, he accepted. A change of scenery seemed desirable. The evening began pleasantly enough. Guests filled the Ashcombe residence. Conversation flowed easily. Lady Victoria appeared radiant in emerald silk. She occupied the seat beside Sebastian throughout dinner and seemed determined to engage his attention. Once he would have welcomed the effort. Tonight he found himself strangely distracted. You seem far away, Lady Victoria observed during dessert. Sebastian glanced up. Do I? A little. Her smile remained charming. Surely estate matters cannot be so consuming. He considered offering a polite answer. Instead, he found himself speaking honestly. The estate has been unusually complicated lately. Because of staffing changes? He looked at her in surprise. You know about that? Everyone knows. Lady Victoria sipped her wine gracefully. Your companion resigned quite suddenly. Companion. The word felt oddly inadequate. Yes. I imagine replacements are difficult to train. Apparently. She laughed softly. Well, some people become too comfortable in one position. Sebastian frowned. Something about the comment bothered him. What do you mean? Only that long-serving staff occasionally forget their place. Her tone remained casual. Dependence is rarely healthy. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, irritation stirred unexpectedly inside him. Miss Hartwell never forgot her place. Lady Victoria blinked. I did not suggest otherwise. Yet she had. In a subtle way. A dismissive way. Sebastian suddenly realized he disliked hearing Genevieve discussed as though she were merely another servant. The realization surprised him as much as anyone. The remainder of the evening passed without improvement. Every conversation felt shallow. Every laugh seemed forced. By the time he returned to Ravenshire, he was exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, which made even less sense. Near midnight he entered the library. The room had become a refuge lately, perhaps because traces of Genevieve lingered there. The vase of lavender remained near the window. Fresh flowers now appeared every Monday because Sarah continued the tradition. Several books Genevieve once recommended sat upon a nearby shelf. Even the arrangement of furniture reflected choices she had made years ago. Sebastian lowered himself into a chair beside the fire. Silence settled around him. Then his gaze landed on something unexpected. A small volume tucked behind several larger books. Curious, he retrieved it. The cover revealed a collection of poetry. He opened the front page. A brief inscription appeared in elegant handwriting. To Miss Genevieve Hartwell, for always reminding others that kindness is never wasted. Lady Eleanor Wycliffe. Christmas 1845. Sebastian stared at the page, then slowly continued reading. Marginal notes filled several passages. Genevieve's handwriting. Small observations. Favorite lines. Reflections on particular verses. Nothing dramatic. Nothing intimate. Yet somehow the words revealed more of her than he had learned in 6 years. She admired resilience, quiet courage, compassion, hope. She valued people who persevered without recognition. People who continued choosing kindness despite disappointment. Sebastian closed the book slowly. A strange sensation settled over him. Regret. Not romantic regret. Not yet. Something simpler. More unsettling. The realization that he had known Genevieve's presence without ever truly knowing Genevieve herself. The distinction mattered. More than he cared to admit. Snow continued falling outside. Firelight danced across the room. Sebastian opened the book again and read another passage. Then another. An hour passed without his noticing. Somewhere deep within the estate, life continued according to familiar rhythms. Yet inside the quiet library, a crack had begun spreading through assumptions he had never questioned before. Genevieve had not simply been efficient. She had not simply been kind. She had not simply been useful. She had been an entire person standing directly before him for 6 years while he looked everywhere except at her. And for the first time since her departure, that truth no longer felt like a minor inconvenience. Felt like a loss. One he was only beginning to understand. The discovery happened by accident. Nearly 6 weeks after Genevieve's departure, Sebastian entered the West storage room searching for estate maps. The room occupied a quiet corner of Ravenshire rarely visited except during annual inventory reviews. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Wooden crates stood neatly stacked. Dust gathered in corners untouched for months. Normally Sebastian would have sent someone else to retrieve the maps. Today he found himself wanting the distraction. Winter had settled firmly over Yorkshire. Snow covered the grounds. The days felt shorter. The evenings felt longer. And despite every effort to focus on practical matters, his thoughts continued returning to a woman who was no longer there. He located the maps quickly enough. The unexpected discovery came while replacing a ledger on an upper shelf. A small box shifted behind several record books and tumbled forward. Sebastian caught it before it struck the floor. Curious, he examined it. The box was simple. Polished oak. No lock. No identifying mark except a small paper label attached to one side. Household Correspondence Archive. Miss Hartwell. Sebastian hesitated, then opened it. Inside rested dozens of neatly bundled letters secured with ribbons of varying colors. At first he assumed they contained ordinary administrative records. Yet the first bundle revealed something entirely different. Personal requests, thank you notes, letters from villagers, correspondence from widows, school teachers, clergy, and struggling families throughout the county. Sebastian unfolded the top letter. Dear Miss Hartwell, because of your kindness, my daughter shall remain in school through the winter. I cannot adequately express our gratitude. May God bless you as generously as you have blessed us. He frowned. A second letter followed. Then a third. Then a fourth. Everyone told a similar story. Quiet assistance. Anonymous support. Problems solved without recognition. Lives improved through unseen acts of generosity. None of the letters mentioned Ravenshire. None praised the Duke. They praised Genevieve. He carried the box directly to the library. 2 hours later it remained open upon the table before him. The pile of correspondence had grown steadily. Each letter revealed another piece of a life he barely understood. A church roof repaired after storm damage. Medical treatment arranged for an elderly laborer. Educational expenses covered for several promising students. Emergency food deliveries during a difficult harvest. Hundreds of small acts. Individually modest. Collectively extraordinary. Sebastian leaned back slowly. Good Lord! The words escaped before he could stop them. A soft voice answered from the doorway. That was my reaction as well. Lady Eleanor entered carrying a book. Her gaze immediately found the box. No surprise appeared on her face. Only quiet understanding. Sebastian looked up. You knew about this? Some of it. She joined him at the table. Not all. He lifted another letter. Why was none of this ever mentioned? The Dowager Duchess smiled sadly. Because Genevieve never did such things for praise. Sebastian stared at the correspondence spread across the table. How much money did she spend? Most of her personal allowance. Most. Sometimes all. The answer stunned him. That is absurd. No. Lady Eleanor's voice softened. That was Genevieve. Silence settled between them. Sebastian picked up another letter. This one came from a schoolmaster. Miss Hartwell personally purchased books for 12 children after learning their families could not afford them. Another described blankets distributed during a severe winter. Another thanked her for arranging employment for a struggling widow. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Genevieve noticed people. Not because it benefited her. Because she genuinely cared. He set the letter aside. How did she find time? Lady Eleanor laughed quietly. That is the question everyone asks eventually. Her smile faded. She found time because helping others mattered more to her than helping herself. The words lingered. Helping others mattered more than helping herself. Sebastian suddenly remembered dozens of moments he had dismissed over the years. Genevieve arriving late to dinner because she had been visiting a sick family in the village. Genevieve declining invitations because she was organizing charitable collections. Genevieve spending evenings writing correspondence long after her official duties ended. At the time he admired her diligence. Now he realized he had never bothered asking why. The realization felt uncomfortable. Another bundle caught his attention. Unlike the others, these letters appeared older. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. Sebastian untied the ribbon and unfolded the first page. The letter came from a solicitor. His expression changed immediately. The correspondence concerned Genevieve's father. Several financial documents followed. Then legal records. Then personal notes. Slowly a picture emerged. Reverend Hartwell had died leaving considerable debt. Creditors had threatened to claim nearly everything. Genevieve had sold family possessions to settle obligations. She had rejected multiple marriage offers because the terms would have required abandoning her younger cousins. She had accepted employment at Ravenshire largely because it allowed her to support relatives who depended upon her assistance. Sebastian stared at the papers in disbelief. She never said any of this. No. Lady Eleanor's answer carried no surprise. She would have considered it complaining. Another memory surfaced. 6 years earlier. Genevieve arriving at Ravenshire with only 2 trunks and a determined smile. He had assumed she simply needed respectable employment. The reality had been far more complicated. Far more difficult. Yet she never spoke of sacrifice. Never demanded sympathy. Never sought admiration. She simply endured. A smaller envelope slipped from one of the folders. Sebastian reached for it automatically. Then paused. The handwriting looked familiar. Very familiar. His own name appeared on the front. For Sebastian. The words froze him completely. Lady Eleanor noticed immediately. Her expression shifted. I have never seen that before. Neither had he. Slowly Sebastian opened the envelope. Inside rested a single folded page. No date. No formal greeting. Just words written in Genevieve's unmistakable script. For several seconds he merely stared at them. Then he began reading. The letter was never intended to be sent. That became obvious immediately. Contained no requests. No expectations. No declarations. Only reflections. Observations. Small moments preserved on paper. She wrote about watching him help a tenant family after flooding damaged their home. About hearing him quietly fund a scholarship for a young boy with remarkable academic promise. About witnessing acts of kindness he probably believed no one noticed. She admired his integrity, his sense of responsibility, his dedication to people who depended upon him. Yet one passage struck harder than all the others. Sometimes I think the loneliest people are those surrounded by everyone. Everyone sees the title, the position, the responsibilities. Very few see the person carrying them. I hope someone eventually does. Sebastian stopped reading. The room had become impossibly quiet. Lady Eleanor remained silent. She understood this moment belonged entirely to him. He looked down at the page again. Not once did Genevieve mention herself. Not once did she ask for affection. Not once did she suggest he owed her anything. Even in private. Even in a letter never meant to be read. Her concern focused entirely upon him. A painful realization settled heavily inside his chest. She had understood him better than most people ever would. And he had known almost nothing about her. The imbalance felt unbearable. He folded the letter carefully, then unfolded it again, then read it a second time. Each sentence revealed something new. Not about Genevieve's feelings. About her character. Her generosity. Her remarkable capacity for compassion. She had spent years seeing the best in him while he barely saw her at all. Outside the library, evening darkness gathered beyond the windows. Snow drifted softly across the grounds. Firelight flickered across shelves lined with books. Yet Sebastian scarcely noticed any of it. His attention remained fixed upon the letter in his hands. At last he spoke. Why did she leave without saying any of this? Lady Eleanor looked toward the fire. Because she loved with dignity. The answer landed with devastating clarity. Not because she lacked courage. Not because she lacked feeling. Because she respected herself enough to walk away when staying became too painful. Sebastian lowered his gaze. For the first time since Genevieve left Ravenshire, he stopped thinking about the work she performed. He stopped thinking about the problems she solved. He stopped thinking about the empty spaces she left behind. Instead, he thought about the woman herself. The woman who quietly gave away most of what she possessed. The woman who carried burdens without complaint. The woman who saw goodness in others even when they failed to see her. And somewhere deep inside him, something finally broke. Not dramatically, not all at once. Simply a painful understanding spreading through every certainty he once held. Genevieve had not been invisible. He had chosen not to look. And now that he finally saw her, she was gone. The morning Sebastian Wickliffe decided to find Genevieve Hartwell began with a letter he could no longer stop reading. The unsent page remained folded inside his coat pocket. He had carried it for 3 days. During breakfast. During estate meetings. During long evenings spent staring into library fires that offered warmth but no answers. Each time he reread the words, the same realization returned. Genevieve had seen him, truly seen him. Not the title, not the fortune, not the responsibilities attached to Ravenshire. Him. Yet when he searched his own memories, he discovered painful gaps. He remembered her efficiency, her reliability, her calm presence during difficult situations. But what was her favorite book? What made her laugh without restraint? What dream had she abandoned when she came to Ravenshire? The answers should have been obvious after 6 years. Instead, he knew almost nothing. Snow drifted past the dining room windows as he pushed aside his untouched breakfast. Across the table, Lady Eleanor watched him with increasing interest. You have not eaten a single bite. Sebastian glanced down. She was correct. I was distracted. By Genevieve? The question came so directly that he almost smiled. His mother had apparently abandoned subtlety. Perhaps. Lady Eleanor lowered her teacup. That is progress. I hardly see how. 3 months ago you would have said her name only when discussing schedules. Sebastian rubbed a hand across his jaw. Mother. What? Her eyes sparkled. I am old. I have earned the right to be observant. He considered denying everything. Unfortunately, denial required energy he no longer possessed. I keep discovering things. About Genevieve? About how little I knew her. Silence settled briefly. Then Lady Eleanor spoke softly. That realization usually arrives before regret. The words struck with uncomfortable precision. Because regret had already arrived. It appeared in unexpected places. In empty corridors. In letters she would have answered better. In conversations where he found himself wondering what opinion she might have offered. Most troubling of all, it appeared whenever he imagined her building a life that no longer included Ravenshire. Or him. The thought lingered long after breakfast ended. By midday Sebastian found himself riding toward the village despite the cold. He told himself he needed to inspect several tenant properties. The explanation sounded reasonable. It also happened to be entirely false. His actual destination stood near the edge of the village square. A small stone schoolhouse. One of the many charitable projects Genevieve had quietly supported over the years. Children filled the building with cheerful noise. Their laughter carried into the winter air as Sebastian approached. The schoolmaster looked surprised by the visit. Your Grace, Mr. Turner. They exchanged greetings before Sebastian glanced toward the classroom windows. I understand Miss Hartwell was involved here. The older man's face immediately brightened. Miss Hartwell? Indeed she was. The warmth in his voice caught Sebastian's attention. How so? Mr. Turner laughed softly. In every possible way. For the next 20 minutes, Sebastian listened. He learned that Genevieve purchased books when funding fell short. She organized reading programs during summer months. She visited regularly to help students struggling with lessons. Several children would never have remained in school without her intervention. She never wanted recognition, Mr. Turner said. In fact, she specifically asked us not to mention her contributions publicly. Sebastian looked through the classroom window. Children bent over books, learning, growing, benefiting from efforts nobody associated with Genevieve because she deliberately kept herself hidden. The pattern repeated itself again, and again, and again. On the ride back to Ravenshire, he stopped at the village church. The rector welcomed him warmly. Within minutes, another collection of stories emerged. Families helped during illness, repairs funded anonymously, quiet acts of generosity extending across years. Sebastian eventually asked the question forming in his mind. Did she ever speak about herself? The rector smiled sadly. Rarely. Why? Some people focus so completely on helping others that they forget they deserve care as well. The answer stayed with him throughout the journey home. That evening he entered the library carrying a notebook. By midnight, several pages contained nothing but observations about Genevieve. Facts, memories, fragments of understanding gathered too late. She loved books. She preferred practical solutions over grand gestures. She gave away money she could barely afford to lose. She remembered everyone's birthdays. She noticed when people were lonely. The list continued growing. Yet instead of satisfying him, it deepened his frustration. There remained so much he did not know. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Lady Eleanor entered carrying a candle. Her gaze immediately found the notebook. That appears serious. Sebastian closed it halfway. Perhaps. She sat opposite him. You intend to find her. The statement startled him because he had not yet spoken the decision aloud. How did you know? Because I raised you. Her smile softened. And because you finally look miserable enough. He laughed despite himself. Then the humor faded. Would that be inappropriate? Lady Eleanor studied him carefully. Why do you wish to find her? The question mattered. More than any other. Sebastian considered his answer. At first I thought I wanted to apologize. And now, he stared into the fire. Now I am not certain apology is enough. Silence followed. The older woman nodded slowly. Good, good. An apology is about relieving your conscience. Her voice remained gentle. Understanding someone is about earning the right to be part of their life. The distinction struck deeply. Sebastian sat motionless. Understanding someone. Not winning them. Not convincing them. Understanding them. For the first time, he realized how selfish his initial intentions might have been. He wanted forgiveness because guilt hurt. He wanted resolution because uncertainty troubled him. Yet Genevieve owed him neither. The realization changed everything. Several days later, a letter arrived from Bath. Not from Genevieve. From an acquaintance of Lady Eleanor's. The correspondence mentioned a charitable reading society recently established in the city. One sentence caught Sebastian's attention immediately. The program has flourished under the guidance of Miss Genevieve Hartwell, whose organizational talents continue to astonish everyone involved. He read the passage twice, then a third time. Flourished. The word should have pleased him. Instead it stirred something far more complicated. Pride, admiration, relief, and beneath all three emotions, something sharp. Someone else had noticed her. Someone else appreciated what Ravenshire took for granted. The realization arrived with startling force. Genevieve was not sitting alone mourning a lost chapter of her life. She was building a new one, a successful one, a meaningful one. Without him, that evening another guest visited Ravenshire. Lady Victoria Ashcombe arrived for tea with Lady Eleanor. Sebastian joined them briefly out of politeness. Conversation remained pleasant until Lady Victoria mentioned Bath. I heard your former companion has settled there. Sebastian looked up immediately. Lady Victoria noticed. Of course she did. Apparently she has become quite popular, she continued. Some gentleman connected to the reading society has taken particular interest in her. The room became very quiet. Sebastian felt something unpleasant twist inside his chest. Unexpected, immediate, completely irrational. Lady Eleanor observed him over the rim of her teacup. How interesting. Lady Victoria smiled. Indeed, It appears Miss Hartwell is finally receiving attention she deserves. The comment sounded innocent. Perhaps it was. Yet Sebastian spent the remainder of the conversation strangely distracted. That night he paced the library long after midnight. A gentleman connected to the Reading Society. The phrase repeated endlessly. Who was he? How much time did he spend with Genevieve? Did he make her laugh? Did he appreciate her intelligence? Did he see her the way Sebastian should have seen her years ago? The questions grew increasingly irritating. Finally he stopped pacing and stared out the window. Snow covered the grounds beneath moonlight. The estate slept peacefully around him. Somewhere in Bath, Genevieve was living a life beyond his reach. Meeting people he did not know. Sharing moments he would never witness. The thought hurt more than expected. Much more. For the first time, jealousy entered the story. Not because another man necessarily existed. Because another man could. And if one did, Sebastian suddenly understood something with painful clarity. He was no longer afraid of losing the version of Genevieve he remembered. He was afraid of losing the chance to know the woman she had become. The realization left him standing motionless beside the window for a very long time. Then, sometime after midnight, he crossed the room, sat at his desk, and began making arrangements for a journey to Bath. The journey to Bath took 3 days. 3 long days of winter roads, changing horses, crowded coaching inns, and far too much time alone with his thoughts. By the time Sebastian Wycliffe crossed the final rise overlooking the city, he had constructed and discarded a dozen different conversations. In some versions, Genevieve welcomed him warmly. In others, she accepted his apology with quiet grace. A few ended with awkward politeness and immediate dismissal. None prepared him for reality. Bath appeared beneath a pale winter sky, elegant and alive despite the season. Honey-colored stone buildings stretched across the hillsides. Carriages rolled steadily through busy streets. Well-dressed gentlemen and ladies moved between shops, assembly rooms, and promenades. The city possessed a different energy than Yorkshire. Ravenshire felt rooted, permanent. Bath felt dynamic, full of motion and possibility. Sebastian checked into a respectable hotel overlooking one of the main squares. Within an hour, he had already begun making discreet inquiries. The Reading Society proved remarkably easy to locate. Genevieve's reputation apparently was not. Everyone seemed eager to discuss her. Miss Hartwell? The elderly librarian said with an immediate smile. A remarkable woman. The same description followed at a local church. Then again at a charitable society. Then again from a bookseller. Remarkable. Kind. Intelligent. Tireless. The pattern sounded increasingly familiar. Yet hearing strangers praise her somehow affected him more deeply than expected. They saw exactly what he had overlooked. Late the following afternoon, Sebastian finally found the Reading Society. The organization occupied a modest but welcoming building near a quiet square lined with bare winter trees. Children's voices drifted through open doors. Laughter followed. He stopped on the opposite side of the street. For several moments he simply stood there. After months of searching, months of reflection, months of regret, Genevieve was less than 50 feet away. His pulse quickened unexpectedly. The sensation annoyed him. He was a grown man, a duke, not a nervous schoolboy. Yet his hands felt strangely unsteady. The front door opened. Several children emerged carrying books. A woman followed. Not Genevieve. Then another group appeared. Then finally she stepped into the afternoon sunlight. Sebastian forgot how to breathe. She looked different. Not dramatically. Not in ways most people would notice. Yet the changes struck him immediately. Her clothing remained modest but elegant. Her posture seemed lighter, more relaxed. The careful reserve she once carried had softened. Most noticeable of all was her expression. She smiled. Not politely. Not out of duty. Genuinely. The sight affected him far more than it should have. A young boy tugged at her sleeve. Genevieve laughed and bent to answer whatever question he asked. Another child joined them. Then another. Within seconds she stood surrounded by an enthusiastic audience. Sebastian watched from across the street. Every instinct urged him forward. Instead he remained where he was, observing, For the first time, he saw Genevieve outside Ravenshire. Outside responsibility. Outside his shadow. She belonged here. The realization brought equal parts pride and pain. Eventually, the children departed. Genevieve gathered several books against her chest and turned toward the square. Her gaze swept across the street, then froze. Sebastian knew the exact moment she recognized him. The books nearly slipped from her arms. Her smile vanished. Not because she was frightened, because she was stunned. For several seconds, neither moved. The city continued bustling around them. Carriages rattled over stone streets. Vendors called to customers. Conversations drifted through the cold air. Yet everything seemed strangely distant. Finally, Sebastian crossed the street. Genevieve remained perfectly still. Miss Hartwell. Her expression settled into careful composure. He remembered that look. The one she used whenever emotions threatened to reveal too much. Your Grace. The formal greeting landed harder than expected. Once she had spoken his title with warmth, familiarity, affection. Now it sounded like a wall. Sebastian stopped several feet away. I hope I am not interrupting. You are unexpected. Fair enough. He almost smiled. May we speak? A long silence followed. Genevieve studied him carefully. Whatever she saw did not reassure her. I do not believe that would be appropriate. The answer felt like a physical blow. Not cruel. Not dramatic. Simply firm. Sebastian had expected resistance. Somehow that did not make it easier. Only a few minutes. Why? The question deserved honesty. Because I owe you an apology. Genevieve lowered her gaze briefly. When she looked back, her expression remained calm. I accepted that apology months ago. You have not heard it. I do not need to. The response stunned him. Not because she dismissed his apology. Because she genuinely seemed to mean it. There was no bitterness. No anger. Only distance. Somehow that hurt more. Genevieve. The use of her name caused the faintest reaction. A brief flicker across her features. Then it vanished. Your Grace. The correction could not have been clearer. Silence stretched between them. Finally, she shifted the books in her arms. If there is nothing else. Sebastian realized he was losing her. Again. I was wrong. The words emerged before he could stop them. Genevieve paused. About many things. He continued. About you. About your value. About how much this estate depended upon you. Her eyes softened slightly. Not enough. You traveled all the way to Bath to discuss estate management? The question carried the first hint of irony he had ever heard from her. Oddly enough, it gave him hope. No. Genevieve waited. Sebastian searched for the right words. They refused to come. Everything sounded inadequate. Every explanation felt selfish. Finally, he settled upon the truth. I came because I realized I never truly knew you. The silence that followed seemed endless. Genevieve's gaze held his. For a brief moment, vulnerability appeared in her eyes. Then she looked away. That realization came rather late. There it was. Not anger. Sadness. Somehow worse. Sebastian nodded slowly. Yes. Another pause. Then Genevieve drew a steady breath. I appreciate your honesty. The formality had returned. But I have responsibilities. She glanced toward the building behind her. People are waiting. Sebastian followed her gaze. Through the window he could see volunteers arranging books and preparing evening lessons. A life. Her life. One that continued perfectly well without him. Of course, he said quietly. Genevieve inclined her head. I wish you a pleasant stay in Bath. Then she turned and walked away. No dramatic farewell. No tears. No emotional confrontation. Simply a woman continuing her day. Sebastian remained standing in the square long after she disappeared inside the building. The cold air felt sharper now. The city seemed louder. More distant. He had imagined this meeting for weeks. In every version she stayed. In every version they talked. In every version he made progress. Reality offered none of those things. She had listened politely, then left, because she owed him nothing. The truth settled heavily upon him. Several hours later, he found himself wandering through Bath without purpose. Gas lamps illuminated the streets. Music drifted from a nearby assembly hall. Couples laughed as they crossed the square. Life moved forward around him. Yet his thoughts remained fixed upon a single conversation. That realization came rather late. She was right. Months earlier he would have expected forgiveness simply because he finally understood his mistake. Now he understood something else. Recognition did not erase neglect. Regret did not undo years of blindness. If he wanted another chance, he would have to earn it. Not through apologies. Not through grand gestures. Through patience. Through understanding. Through proving that he finally saw the woman standing before him. Not the role she filled. Not the duties she performed. The woman herself. The challenge felt impossible. Yet as Sebastian stopped beside a bridge overlooking the dark river and watched the lights of Bath shimmer across the water, he realized he was not ready to leave. For the first time in his life, the Duke of Ravenshire wanted something he could not command, purchase, or inherit. He wanted the opportunity to be worthy of Genevieve Hartwell's attention. And judging by the look in her eyes that afternoon, he had a very long way to go. The next morning, Sebastian did not return to the reading society. Every instinct urged him to do exactly that. To seek another conversation. To explain himself more clearly. To somehow repair years of neglect through sheer determination. Fortunately, common sense intervened. Genevieve had made her position clear. She did not want apologies delivered on his timetable. She did not owe him immediate forgiveness simply because he had finally arrived at the truth. So instead, he waited. It was an unfamiliar strategy. Patience came naturally when managing estates, investments, or political negotiations. Patience proved considerably more difficult when the matter involved a woman whose absence had already altered the course of his life. The second day in Bath brought rain. A steady winter drizzle transformed the city streets into shining ribbons of reflected lamplight. Sebastian spent the morning reviewing estate correspondence from Ravenshire. Yet even while reading reports, his attention wandered. Shortly after noon, he folded the last letter and decided to walk. Not toward the reading society. Somewhere else. Anywhere else. Fate, however, appeared to possess a sense of humor. He found Genevieve entirely by accident. She stood beneath the covered entrance of a small bookseller's shop speaking with an elderly woman carrying far too many parcels. The older lady looked flustered. One package slipped from her grasp. Before Sebastian could react, Genevieve had already bent to retrieve it. She listened patiently while the woman explained something at considerable length. Then she offered her arm. Together they disappeared into the rain. Sebastian remained where he stood, watching. Not because he intended to follow her, because the moment felt strangely familiar. That was what Genevieve always did. She noticed burdens, then quietly helped carry them. No audience required. No recognition expected. He continued walking. An hour later, he entered a small cafe near the assembly rooms. While waiting for tea, he overheard two women discussing charitable projects. Miss Hartwell organized everything in less than 3 weeks, one said. I still do not understand how she manages it. Her companion laughed. Neither do I. She remembers every detail. Every name. Every promise. Sebastian stared into his teacup. The pattern continued. Everywhere he went, echoes of Genevieve appeared. Not because she sought attention, because she improved every place she touched. Later that afternoon, he encountered another surprise. A gentleman approximately his own age approached while he examined books at a public reading room. Your Grace. Sebastian looked up. Yes. The man smiled politely. Arthur Bennett. He extended a hand. I believe we share an acquaintance. The name meant nothing. Do we? Miss Hartwell. Something unpleasant tightened inside Sebastian's chest. The reaction was immediate and irrational. Arthur Bennett noticed none of it. He appeared entirely friendly. She mentioned serving at Ravenshire. Sebastian forced himself to remain calm. You know Miss Hartwell well? Reasonably well. Bennett smiled. Everyone involved in the reading society does. They spoke briefly. Arthur proved intelligent, thoughtful, well-respected within Bath's charitable circles. Every quality Sebastian suddenly found deeply inconvenient. Miss Hartwell has transformed several community programs. Bennett continued. I have never met anyone quite like her. Sebastian managed a polite nod. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. Yet by the time it ended, an uncomfortable realization had settled over him. Genevieve was admired here, not quietly appreciated from a distance. Admired, respected, valued. Men listened when she spoke. Women sought her advice. Entire organizations relied upon her judgment. In Bath, people recognized her worth immediately. No one required 6 years. That evening Sebastian walked through the city long after darkness fell. Snow had begun replacing rain. Delicate white flakes drifted through the glow of gas lamps. The beauty of the scene did little to improve his mood. Arthur Bennett. The name repeated itself with increasing irritation. Nothing in the conversation suggested romantic interest. Yet Sebastian could not dismiss the possibility. Why would another man fail to notice what he himself now saw so clearly? The answer, of course, was that such a man would not. And that truth frightened him more than expected. The following morning brought an invitation he never anticipated. A note arrived at his hotel shortly after breakfast. The handwriting belonged to Genevieve. For several seconds he simply stared at the envelope. Then he opened it carefully. Your Grace, I understand you remain in Bath. While I continue to believe your journey was unnecessary, I would prefer our acquaintance not become a source of public speculation. If you are available this afternoon, I shall be visiting the public gardens at 2 o'clock. A conversation in daylight seems preferable to rumors. Respectfully, Genevieve Hartwell. Sebastian read the note twice. Then a third time. It was not exactly encouragement. Yet it was not dismissal. Most importantly, she had initiated contact. That alone felt like a small miracle. He arrived 15 minutes early. Winter had emptied much of the public garden. Bare trees stretched toward a pale sky. Snow rested lightly upon pathways and benches. A fountain stood silent near the center of the grounds. Sebastian waited beside it. At precisely 2 o'clock, Genevieve appeared. She wore a dark green coat trimmed with simple fur. Snowflakes gathered briefly in her hair before melting. Somehow she looked even more composed than during their previous meeting. More confident. More certain of herself. Miss Hartwell. She inclined her head. Your Grace. They began walking slowly along one of the garden paths. Silence accompanied them for several moments. Not uncomfortable, merely cautious. Finally Genevieve spoke first. How long do you intend to remain in Bath? Sebastian appreciated the directness. I have not decided. Because of estate business? He met her gaze. Because of you. Genevieve looked forward again. Her expression revealed nothing. Yet he noticed her fingers tighten briefly around her gloves. Progress, however slight. That is not a wise answer, she said quietly. Why? She stopped walking. Snow drifted gently around them. Because I am not the person you imagine. Sebastian frowned. I do not imagine you at all. A faint crease appeared between her brows. What does that mean? It means I spent years imagining who you were without actually knowing. He held her gaze. I have no interest in repeating the mistake. For the first time, genuine surprise appeared in her eyes. Small, fleeting, yet unmistakable. Neither spoke. The winter air felt sharp against his face. Somewhere beyond the garden walls, Bath continued its busy rhythm. Here time seemed to slow. Finally Genevieve resumed walking. You have changed. The observation sounded reluctant, as though she disliked acknowledging it. Sebastian almost smiled. I hope so. People rarely do. Then perhaps I should consider myself fortunate. Another silence followed. Yet this one felt different. Less defensive. Less distant. They spoke for nearly an hour. Not about feelings. Not about the past. About books. Charitable work. Bath. Yorkshire. Small things. Ordinary things. And for the first time, Sebastian discovered pieces of Genevieve he had somehow missed for years. She loved history. She preferred winter to summer. She secretly disliked formal balls. She collected quotations from favorite novels. Each revelation felt absurdly precious. Eventually, the afternoon light began fading. Genevieve glanced toward the sky. I should return. Of course. Neither moved immediately. The moment stretched. Then she offered a small smile. Not the careful, polite smile she once used at Ravenshire. A real one. Brief but genuine. "Thank you for listening," she said. Sebastian stared at her. Listening. Most people come seeking forgiveness. Her gaze softened. You came seeking understanding. Before he could answer, she turned and walked away. This time, Sebastian did not feel defeated as he watched her leave. He felt hopeful. Because for the first time since arriving in Bath, Genevieve had not spoken to him like a stranger. And for the first time since she left Ravenshire, she had allowed him to see the woman she had become. The realization remained with him long after she disappeared beyond the snow-covered paths. Yet even as hope began growing, another truth emerged beside it. Understanding Genevieve was not the end of the journey. It was only the beginning, and somewhere deep inside, he sensed the most difficult part still lay ahead. For the first time in his life, Sebastian Wickliffe found himself afraid of a future he desperately wanted. The realization arrived on an ordinary winter afternoon. Snow melted slowly from the rooftops of Bath. The streets remained busy despite the cold. Carriages rolled past shopfronts decorated for the approaching holiday season. Everything around him appeared perfectly normal. Yet inside, something fundamental had changed. He loved her. The truth no longer allowed denial. It had begun quietly months earlier, hidden beneath regret and admiration and guilt. Now it stood before him, impossible to ignore. He loved Genevieve Hartwell, not because she was kind, not because she was intelligent, not because she had become indispensable to Ravenshire. He loved the woman herself, the woman who gave away money she could not afford, the woman who remembered everyone's burdens while ignoring her own, the woman who walked away rather than beg for affection that should have been offered freely, the woman who had somehow remained generous even after he failed her. The realization should have brought clarity. Instead it brought fear, because loving her and deserving her were not the same thing. Several days passed after their walk through the public gardens. Sebastian saw Genevieve occasionally, never by accident anymore. Sometimes he attended events connected to the Reading Society. Sometimes they shared brief conversations after meetings. Sometimes they simply exchanged smiles across crowded rooms. Each encounter revealed another piece of the person she had always been. Each encounter deepened his admiration, and each encounter reminded him how much time he had wasted. One evening, the Reading Society hosted a winter fundraiser. The gathering occupied a large hall filled with local families, volunteers, donors, and community leaders. Candles glowed from every corner. Music drifted through the room. Children displayed artwork created through educational programs Genevieve helped establish. Sebastian arrived quietly and remained near the back. He preferred observing. The habit had become surprisingly valuable. From across the room, he watched Genevieve move among guests. People sought her out constantly. They asked questions, requested advice, shared concerns, thanked her for assistance, and she treated every person with the same attention, the same respect, the same warmth. At one point, an elderly gentleman approached her with obvious difficulty walking. Without hesitation, Genevieve adjusted her path and accompanied him across the room. Not dramatically, not for attention, simply because he needed help. The sight hit Sebastian with unexpected force. 6 years. 6 years of moments exactly like that. Moments he barely noticed because he assumed they would always exist. Arthur Bennett appeared beside him carrying 2 glasses of cider. You look as though you are studying military strategy. Sebastian accepted the offered drink. Is it that obvious? Arthur laughed. Only to everyone. His gaze shifted toward Genevieve. Remarkable woman. Sebastian did not disagree. Arthur smiled knowingly. You care for her. The directness caught him off guard. That appears to be becoming public knowledge. Not quite. Arthur took a sip of cider. But anyone paying attention can see it. Sebastian looked toward Genevieve again. I only wish I had paid attention sooner. For a moment Arthur remained silent. Then he nodded. So does she. Sebastian turned sharply. What? Arthur shrugged. You think nobody noticed? Hope surged unexpectedly. Dangerous hope. She spoke of me? Rarely. Arthur smiled faintly. But enough. Before Sebastian could ask more, a volunteer requested Arthur's assistance elsewhere. The conversation ended. Yet those 3 words remained. So does she. Throughout the evening they echoed endlessly. Several hours later the fundraiser concluded successfully. Guests departed. Volunteers began cleaning tables and organizing supplies. Sebastian remained behind to help. The gesture surprised everyone, including himself. Genevieve noticed. A duke carrying chairs, she said lightly. The newspapers would be scandalized. He smiled. Fortunately, there are no newspapers present. They worked side by side for nearly 20 minutes. Comfortable silence settled between them. Not awkward, not forced, simply peaceful. Eventually, only a handful of volunteers remained. Genevieve gathered a stack of books. Sebastian automatically reached for half of them. Their hands brushed briefly. Both paused. The contact lasted less than a second. Yet neither immediately stepped away. Genevieve looked up. Her eyes met his. Something shifted. Not around them. Between them. The realization felt almost tangible. Then footsteps interrupted. The moment vanished. Genevieve lowered her gaze and continued organizing books. Sebastian helped without speaking. Yet his pulse refused to return to normal. Later that night he walked her home. The arrangement occurred naturally. Several volunteers departed in different directions. Snow had begun falling again. The streets glowed beneath rows of gas lamps. Bath looked beautiful after dark. Quiet. Dreamlike. For several blocks they discussed ordinary things. Upcoming projects. Winter weather. A new educational program. Safe topics. Comfortable topics. Then Genevieve stopped unexpectedly beside a small bridge crossing the river. The water below reflected scattered lights from nearby buildings. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air. "Why are you really here?" she asked softly. Sebastian knew exactly what she meant. Not Bath. Not the walk. Everything. He looked at her for a long moment. This was the moment he had imagined repeatedly. The moment he thought he wanted. Yet now that it arrived, words felt inadequate. Finally he chose honesty. Complete honesty. "Because losing you changed me." Genevieve remained silent. He continued. "At first I thought I missed what you did for Ravenshire." A bitter smile touched his lips. "Then I thought I missed your friendship." He drew a slow breath. "Eventually I realized I missed you." The river moved quietly beneath them. Snow settled along the stone railing. Genevieve looked away first. Sebastian. It was the first time she had spoken his name since leaving Ravenshire. The sound nearly broke him. "I was not enough," she whispered. The statement struck harder than any accusation could have, because it revealed the wound hidden beneath everything else. Not anger, not humiliation, pain. Years of it. Sebastian stepped closer. Not enough to crowd her. Just enough that she would hear every word. "You were always enough." His voice roughened. "I was too blind to see it." Genevieve closed her eyes briefly. "Do you know what hurt most?" He shook his head. She laughed softly. Not from amusement. From sadness. "It was never the ballroom." Sebastian felt his stomach tighten. "Then what was it?" Her gaze lifted to his. "The fact that I was not surprised." Silence followed. Devastating silence. Because suddenly he understood. The ballroom had not created the wound. It had exposed it. Years of being overlooked. Years of standing beside him while he admired everyone except her. Years of hoping for something he never offered. The careless laughter had simply confirmed what she already believed. Sebastian stared at her. Truly stared. And for the first time he saw the full weight of what his blindness had cost. Not one evening. Not one comment. Years. "Genevieve." His voice nearly failed. "I am so sorry." Tears gathered in her eyes but did not fall. "I know." That somehow made everything worse. Because she believed him. She forgave him. Yet forgiveness did not erase history. Sebastian looked toward the dark river. Then back at her. The truth rose inside him with overwhelming force. He could not hold it any longer. "I love you." The words entered the winter air between them. Simple. Honest. Irrevocable. Genevieve froze completely. Even the falling snow seemed to pause. Sebastian felt strangely calm. For months he had feared this moment. Feared rejection. Feared silence. Feared hope itself. Now none of that mattered. The truth existed. Finally spoken. Genevieve stared at him. Emotion flashed across her face. Shock. Longing. Fear. Heartbreak. Hope. Too many feelings to name. Then she stepped back. Not dramatically. Not cruelly. Just enough to create distance. "Please do not," she whispered. The response hurt, yet not for the reason he expected. Because beneath the words he heard something else. Not rejection. Protection. She was protecting herself. From disappointment. From risk. From believing too easily. Sebastian nodded slowly. "All right." Genevieve looked at him for another long moment, then turned toward home. He did not follow. He did not stop her. He simply watched as she disappeared into the falling snow. Alone on the bridge, the Duke of Ravenshire remained motionless long after she vanished from sight. He had finally said the words. Yet instead of relief, a deeper understanding settled over him. Loving Genevieve was easy. Convincing her that his love could be trusted would be the hardest thing he had ever done. The next morning, Genevieve Hartwell avoided every street where she might accidentally encounter Sebastian Wickliffe. It was a foolish strategy. Bath was not large enough to escape a determined duke forever. More importantly, she was not truly trying to avoid him. She was trying to avoid herself. The distinction mattered. Because the danger had never been Sebastian's persistence. The danger was that part of her still loved him. She had spent months rebuilding her life. Months learning how to stand without leaning toward a dream that had never belonged to her. Months creating a future defined by her own choices rather than quiet hope. Then Sebastian arrived and looked at her as though she were the most important person in the room. The worst part was that she believed him. That frightened her more than anything. She spent the morning reviewing educational proposals for the Reading Society. Then charitable funding requests. Then volunteer schedules. Work normally helped organize her thoughts. Today it failed completely. Every page eventually became the same question. What if he means it? By early afternoon she closed the final ledger with a sigh and rubbed her temples. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Her friend Margaret Ellis entered carrying a basket of correspondence. Margaret had been one of the first people to welcome Genevieve to Bath. Warm-hearted and perceptive, she possessed an unfortunate talent for noticing things others missed. "You look dreadful," Margaret announced cheerfully. Genevieve stared at her. "Thank you." "You are welcome." Margaret sat opposite her. "Now tell me what happened." "Nothing happened." "Then why have you spent 3 days staring out windows like a tragic heroine from a novel?" Genevieve almost laughed. Almost. Margaret's expression softened. "It is him, is it not?" Silence answered for her. Margaret sighed. "The Duke." Genevieve looked down at her hands. "He said he loves me." The words sounded unreal even now. Margaret remained quiet for several moments. "And what did you say?" "Very little." "Why?" "Because I love him too." The answer stayed trapped behind her ribs. Instead she whispered, "Because I do not know if I can survive being wrong twice." Margaret's face softened immediately. She crossed the room and squeezed Genevieve's hand. "That is a different problem." "How?" "The first time you loved a man who never saw you." Margaret's voice remained gentle. "This time you are afraid of a man who finally does." The observation followed Genevieve throughout the remainder of the day. That evening the Reading Society hosted a public gathering celebrating several successful educational programs. Local families attended. Community leaders attended. Donors attended. Nearly everyone connected to the organization seemed present. Genevieve focused on responsibilities. Responsibilities felt safer than emotions. Guests gradually filled the hall. Conversations blended together. Music drifted through the air. Everything proceeded smoothly until a familiar voice near the entrance caused the entire room to shift. Sebastian had arrived. Genevieve felt his presence before she actually saw him. The reaction irritated her. Across the room, conversations paused briefly. People recognized him immediately. A duke attracted attention wherever he appeared. Yet something unusual happened next. Instead of remaining among Bath's social elite, Sebastian moved directly toward the volunteer tables, toward the teachers, toward the workers responsible for the organization's success, toward people most aristocrats barely acknowledged. Genevieve watched from a distance. So did everyone else. Arthur Bennett approached Sebastian first. They exchanged greetings. Then another volunteer joined them. Then another. Within minutes, Sebastian was helping arrange displays and greeting guests as though titles meant nothing. Curiosity spread through the room. Genevieve tried not to stare. She failed. Eventually, the evening's formal presentations began. Several speakers addressed the audience. Educational achievements were recognized. Community initiatives were celebrated. Applause filled the hall repeatedly. Genevieve remained near the side of the stage organizing schedules for upcoming presentations. Then Arthur Bennett appeared beside her looking unusually amused. "You may wish to prepare yourself." Genevieve frowned. "For what?" Arthur smiled. "I have absolutely no idea." Before she could question him further, the evening's chairman stepped forward. "Before we conclude tonight's program, there is one final matter." The audience quieted. "His Grace, the Duke of Ravenshire, has requested a few moments to address the assembly." Genevieve froze. "No, absolutely not." Across the room, Sebastian rose from his seat. Calm, composed, entirely too confident. Hundreds of eyes followed him toward the stage. Genevieve considered fleeing. Unfortunately, there was nowhere to go. Sebastian reached the podium and looked out across the crowd. For a moment he said nothing. Then his gaze found hers. The room disappeared. Not literally, yet it felt that way. "I did not originally intend to speak tonight," he began. "However, there is something I have spent too long leaving unsaid." Genevieve's pulse thundered in her ears. Around her, listeners leaned forward with growing interest. Sebastian continued. "Several months ago, I made a mistake." Soft murmurs moved through the audience. A duke publicly admitting fault was rare. Very rare. "Not a small mistake," he said. "A significant one." His voice remained steady. "I failed to recognize the value of someone extraordinary while she stood directly beside me." The hall became completely silent. Genevieve could barely breathe. Sebastian never looked away from her. "For years I benefited from her intelligence, her kindness, and her loyalty." He paused. "I accepted gifts I did not earn." Emotion roughened his voice. "And I repaid them with indifference." Several audience members exchanged surprised glances. Others simply listened. No one interrupted. Sebastian continued. "The remarkable thing is not that she left." A faint smile touched his lips. "The remarkable thing is that she stayed as long as she did." Genevieve felt tears gathering. Not because of the words themselves, because he understood. Finally, completely, he understood. "There are people who improve every room they enter," Sebastian said quietly. "Not through status, not through wealth, through character." His gaze never wavered. "Miss Genevieve Hartwell is one of those people." The audience turned toward her almost as one. Genevieve wished the floor would open beneath her. Yet beneath the embarrassment came something else. Validation. The kind she never expected to receive. The kind she had stopped needing, which somehow made it more powerful. Sebastian stepped away from the podium, then did something no one anticipated. He crossed the stage, descended the steps, and stopped directly before her. Gasps echoed through the hall. Genevieve stared at him in disbelief. The Duke of Ravenshire, one of the most respected men in England, stood before her in complete silence. Then he spoke softly enough that only those nearest could hear. "I am sorry. No excuses. No explanations. No defenses. Just the truth." Tears finally escaped despite her efforts. Sebastian smiled sadly. "You deserved better than the man I was." His voice lowered further. "I cannot change the past." Another pause. "But I can spend the rest of my life trying to become the man you deserved all along." The room disappeared again. Not because of romance. Because of honesty. Raw and undeniable honesty. Genevieve looked at him and saw no trace of the distant duke, who once laughed away the possibility of her affection. That man was gone. In his place stood someone willing to risk humiliation simply to tell the truth. Around them, silence filled the hall. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone waited. Yet Genevieve understood something important. This moment was not a proposal, not a demand, not a performance. Sebastian was not asking for an answer. He was offering accountability. Publicly, completely. The choice remained hers. As it should. Sebastian stepped back slightly, giving her space, giving her freedom, giving her exactly what he failed to give before, respect. And for the first time since leaving Ravenshire, Genevieve allowed herself to imagine a future where trust might be possible again. Not guaranteed, not immediate, but possible. The realization felt like sunlight after a very long winter. And as applause slowly began spreading through the hall around them, she saw something she never thought she would witness. Relief in Sebastian's eyes. Not because he had won anything, because at last he had finally told the truth. For 3 days after the fundraiser, neither Genevieve nor Sebastian spoke about what had happened. The entire city, however, seemed determined to discuss nothing else. Bath had always enjoyed a good story. A duke publicly admitting fault before an audience and praising a woman without title or fortune provided enough material to sustain conversations for months. Fortunately, most of the speculation remained kind. Unfortunately, Genevieve found herself blushing far more often than she preferred. Everywhere she went, people smiled knowingly. Volunteers exchanged glances. Elderly matrons suddenly became very interested in her future plans. Even the children at the reading society appeared suspiciously amused. By the 4th day, she considered fleeing to another county. On the 5th day, she laughed at the idea. Something inside her had changed. Not because Sebastian declared his feelings. Not because he embarrassed himself before half the city. Those things mattered. Yet they were not the reason her heart felt lighter. The true difference was trust. For the first time, she believed the man standing before her now was not the man she had left behind at Ravenshire. Change was difficult. Real change was rare. Yet Sebastian had done the hardest part. He had changed without expecting a reward. He had apologized without demanding forgiveness. He had listened without defending himself. And somehow, through all of it, he had taught her something she never expected. Love was not proven by words. It was proven by who someone became when no one was watching. On a bright winter morning, Genevieve received a letter. The handwriting belonged to Lady Eleanor. She smiled immediately. The Dowager Duchess had written regularly since her arrival in Bath. Their correspondence remained one of the greatest comforts of her new life. This letter proved different. Much shorter. My dear Genevieve, I have spent years waiting for my son to become sensible. Miracles apparently do happen. Please visit Ravenshire when convenient. There are matters requiring your attention. Also, I miss you terribly. Affectionately, Eleanor. Genevieve laughed aloud. She could practically hear the older woman's voice between every line. Later that afternoon, another visitor arrived. Sebastian. He appeared at the Reading Society carrying a basket of books donated to one of the educational programs. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. He had done similar things several times during the previous week. That was another reason trust had slowly returned. He no longer pursued grand gestures. Instead, he simply showed up. Consistently, reliably, the way genuine affection often did. Genevieve met him outside as volunteers unloaded the books. Snow glistened beneath pale sunlight. The air remained cold enough to turn every breath visible. Your Grace, she said lightly. Sebastian smiled. I believe we have progressed beyond that. Have we? I certainly hope so. The warmth in his eyes made her heart stumble. An increasingly common problem. They walked together through the square. Neither seemed eager to end the conversation. Eventually Sebastian glanced toward her. Mother wrote to you. Genevieve laughed. How do you know? Because she informed me she intended to interfere. That sounds exactly like her. His smile softened. She misses you. The simple statement carried unexpected emotion. Genevieve looked away briefly. I miss her as well. Silence settled comfortably between them. Then Sebastian spoke again. Would you ever return? The question stopped her. Not because she had not considered it. Because she had. More than once. She looked toward the city surrounding them. The Reading Society. The volunteers. The life she built herself. Then she thought about Ravenshire. About Lady Eleanor. About home. Because despite everything, part of her would always think of Ravenshire as home. Perhaps, she answered honestly. Sebastian nodded. He accepted the answer without pressure. Without expectation. Another small change. Another reason she trusted him more each day. A week later they traveled to Yorkshire together. Not alone. Such an arrangement would have scandalized half of England. A proper group accompanied them. The journey felt strangely familiar. Snow-covered hills rolled past the carriage windows. Villages appeared and disappeared. Roads wound through countryside she once knew intimately. Yet everything felt different now. Because she was different. When Ravenshire finally appeared in the distance, emotion tightened unexpectedly in her chest. The estate looked exactly the same. Grand stone walls, towering windows, familiar gardens resting beneath winter frost. Yet this time she arrived not as an employee, not as a companion, not as a woman quietly hoping for affection. She arrived as herself. The distinction mattered. Lady Eleanor greeted her before the carriage fully stopped. Formal etiquette lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then the Dowager Duchess embraced her fiercely. "You took far too long." Genevieve laughed through sudden tears. "It is wonderful to see you too." The older woman held her at arm's length. "You look happy." The observation carried unmistakable satisfaction. Genevieve glanced toward Sebastian standing nearby. He smiled but said nothing. Lady Eleanor noticed everything. Of course she did. The following days passed peacefully. Genevieve reunited with staff members she genuinely cared about, visited village families, reviewed educational programs she once helped establish. Everywhere she went, people welcomed her warmly. The experience felt surreal. For years she believed herself invisible. Now she discovered how many lives she had touched without realizing it. One evening the estate hosted a small gathering. Nothing extravagant, just local families, community leaders, and friends. Conversation filled the ballroom. Music drifted through the air. Candlelight reflected from crystal chandeliers. The scene reminded Genevieve painfully of another evening months earlier. Yet this time everything felt different. Very different. Near the center of the room, Lady Victoria Ashcombe approached with a polite smile. Their last meaningful interaction belonged to another life. "Miss Hartwell." "Lady Victoria." To Genevieve's surprise, the other woman looked slightly embarrassed. "I owe you an apology." Genevieve blinked. Lady Victoria continued before she could respond. "I was not always as kind as I should have been." Her expression softened. "You deserved better." The sincerity caught Genevieve completely off guard. "Thank you," she said quietly. Lady Victoria smiled. "For what it is worth, everyone else noticed long before he did." She glanced across the ballroom toward Sebastian. "Men can be remarkably foolish." Then she departed. Genevieve stood speechless. A moment later Sebastian joined her. "That expression suggests trouble." She laughed. "Apparently you were the last person in England to understand your feelings." "That seems increasingly likely." They shared a smile. Then silence. Comfortable silence. The kind built from understanding rather than uncertainty. Music floated through the ballroom. Couples moved gracefully across polished floors. Around them, laughter and conversation blended into a warm hum of life. Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. Not as though he was studying her. Not as though he feared she might disappear. Simply looking, seeing. The way she always wished to be seen. Genevieve. Her name sounded different now. Softer. Certain. She met his gaze. "Yes." For a moment he said nothing. Then he offered his hand. Not a command. Not an expectation. A choice. Her choice. Every path that brought them here flashed through her mind. The ballroom laughter months ago. The heartbreak. The departure before dawn. The lonely road to Bath. The months of rebuilding. The apologies. The conversations. The patience. The growth. None of it could be erased. Yet perhaps that was the point. The journey mattered because it changed them both. Slowly, Genevieve placed her hand in his. Warmth spread through her chest. Not the fragile hope she once carried. Something stronger. Something earned. Sebastian's fingers closed gently around hers. His expression remained steady. Waiting. Respecting her answer before she even spoke it. Genevieve smiled. Then, for the first time without fear, she chose him. "I think," she said softly, "you finally arrived at the right time." Emotion flashed across his face. Relief, joy, gratitude, all impossible to hide. Around them the ballroom continued shining beneath candlelight. Friends laughed. Music played. Life moved forward. Yet for one perfect moment, none of it mattered. Because the woman who once walked away before dawn stood in the center of a room filled with people who finally saw her worth. And the man who once failed to recognize her value understood it now beyond all doubt. Outside, winter winds swept gently across the Yorkshire countryside. Inside Ravenshire, light and laughter filled every corner of the estate. The future remained unwritten. There would be challenges, responsibilities, ordinary days and difficult seasons. Yet those things no longer felt frightening, because this time they would face them together. Not because love had been easy, because it had been earned. And as the evening continued around them, Genevieve realized something remarkable. The happiest chapter of her life had not begun when someone finally loved her. It began when she learned to walk away from less than she deserved. Everything that followed was simply the reward for having the courage to do so.